Hello everyone, my name is Enes Jansha and I'm happy to welcome you to Tactics and Practice, the series of conferences that Axioma organizes every year since 2010. This year we host the 8th edition of Money Lab, the international network of artists, designers, activists and geeks who experiment with forms of financial democratization. Initially, the conference was supposed to take place last March in the premises of Kinoshishka in Ljubljana, but due to the pandemics, we transform it into a series of regular streaming events that take place every Monday at 5 p.m. Central European Time at axioma.org/moneylab8. Today's panel, Tax Haven Normalized Grand Thefts, puts together a group of investigative artists talking to an investigative journalist. The artistic collective RYBN will introduce some of the findings that resulted from its investigation, The Great Offshore, and artistic and extradisciplinary research that engages offshore finance at the very intimate level. The Demystification Committee instead will introduce their offshore investigation vehicle and artistic project engaging directly with tax havens through the setup and use of an international corporate structure spanning 3 seas. The beachwear collection that was sold online and acted as a trigger for a tax evasion scheme, a digital publication focusing on tricks and cracks in the practice of offshore corporate finance, and all the legal documents attesting the existence of the offshore investigation vehicle is what you can find in Offshore Matters, the current exhibition in Axioma Project Space I'm in right now. You have time until this Friday to come visiting us. Today's panel is moderated by the founder of OSTRO, the Center for Investigative Journalism in the Adriatic region, and member of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, Anushka Delic. Finally, before we begin, I'd like to remind you to use the web chat on the MoneyLab 8 website to share with us your comments and questions during the debate. Towards the end of the session, we will make a selection of the questions you send and ask some to the speakers on your behalf. RYBN, the Demystification Committee, Anushka, welcome. I leave you the stage.
Thank you, Yanis, and hello, everyone. Welcome to Kinoshishka. I feel like we're at the Eurovision Song Contest a little bit, and we will start giving the scores. Actually, I was really looking forward to this discussion today because as the viewers have already seen in the little bit that Yanis showed, journalists, investigative journalists and investigative artists seem to be using the same things, documents and data about offshores, but we use them differently. I think that this debate today could be a way forward towards democratization of the debate about tax havens, because it has been really usurped by the industry itself and the interest groups that benefit from it. The issue of tax havens is a little bit of I don't know, at least for us journalists, it's a little bit painful to write about it, because we always enter it with the notion or preconception that the public will not understand, that it will be too tired of reading about it, or it's going to be too complicated. So we keep trying to find ways how to speak to the audience, how to convey what we want to say about the tax havens. This was very apparent in the Panama Papers investigation that I did many years ago, and I actually don't really like to talk about it that much because it's been 4 years since then, and not really a lot has changed, which is not surprising for me. But it is surprising, it seems, to the general public, which has this in my view, misconception that tax havens are something that we can get rid of, or that they are something that we can get rid of quickly. They have been around for over 100 years. A lot of the major industry basically running this planet is based somehow in tax havens. Transnational crime goes to tax havens. Politically exposed people go to tax havens. So there's too much need for tax havens. Therefore, it is a little bit complicated, to think about how we can try to usurp or how we can demystify and also, take over the debate and get a chair at the table, basically. Um, in Slovenia, I have to say that the tax havens are kind of the thing that other people do and has nothing to do with the general public because they pay their taxes. Or sometimes I get comments like, well, actually, everyone does tax optimization, which is correct. You can, you can have your child, if you have a child, you can pay a little less tax and so on. But that's just, again, normalizing the debate because this is nothing compared to what corporations that have the biggest benefit from tax havens, optimize and so on. Another problematic aspect of tax havens when you're trying to explain them is the fact that in many cases, especially with very sort of high level tax schemes, this means that there is a web of services that come into play. There's legal services, there's company registration services, and so on. So a lot of services that are all in place to help people who would like to optimize their taxes to use tax havens. So again, this makes it hard to explain to people, and in my view, it just sort of enlarges the contextual gap between the problem and the public. And then one effect of the Panama Papers investigation are the registers of beneficiary ownership. So of beneficial owners of companies. The UK has it, Slovenia has it, many EU countries have it. But again, it's whitewashing because these registers are often just a rubber stamp, and the actual beneficial owners are hidden behind the beneficial owners that are shown to the world in the name of transparency. The problem in Slovenia is also that we block the directive that would demand from multinationals to report their taxes, earnings, and so on. But since today we are sitting, I'm sitting in Kino Šiška, and the speakers and the guests are over there. I can barely see them. I think we need to bring, of course, the elephant in the room into the debate. So that is the pandemic. And as we've seen in many EU countries, in Slovenia and elsewhere, the companies benefiting from, let's say, the effects of the pandemic, whether it's because they are selling governments whatever stuff they can get their hands on, or whether they are receiving help from the effect because of the effects. There's offshore companies popping up everywhere. Some countries have decided to try to curb that. They made a list of which tax havens are personas non grata in public procurement or help support for the effects of the pandemic. But of course, the European offshores are not on that list. So again, it's whitewashing and it's normalizing the debate. And so I would like to hear from everyone basically today here, either speakers, guests, or people out there. I don't know how many there are, but I hope that you're going to have a good time here with us. So I'd like to hear basically how do we cut the, how do I not use a French word? So how do I cut the crap, and how do we just stop and say, okay, it's been enough, and now we, the persons that are most affected by the tax havens, which are people who do not have then in their own countries sufficient healthcare, public healthcare, educational system, infrastructure, and so on. So how do we, the people, get a seat at the table when we are talking about tax havens? And is there at all an actual realistic way to disrupt them? So I would now like to give the word over to the Demystification Committee, who will basically show you, our viewers and guests here, how we can approach the problem basically from the bottom up, because obviously the top to the bottom approach is not, or has not been working as everyone would like to. So here you go. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushka. Yeah, exactly. We will talk a lot about kind of incredibly bottom-up process throughout this. Before I get into the depths of the project we're going to discuss, I want to say thanks for the invitation to talk at Money Lab 8. And also thanks to Axioma, the whole team at Axioma, for inviting us to exhibit our work on this topic as part of the Offshore Matters show that Jana's just introduced. This for us is really special because it's Axioma hosting our first solo show, and although we're really sad that we couldn't attend it, we really appreciate all the effort they put in to setting it up under these really strange circumstances. And from what we've seen, it looked great. So for those of you who do get to see it, I'm jealous. By means of an introduction to the by means of an introduction to this topic, I'm going to diagram a little bit the main exhibit in the show, which is also the focus of our talk today, which we call the Offshore Investigation Vehicle. This is kind of the top part of the work that's shown there. This was an international corporate structure which we set up across 2017 and 18. And it aims to explore offshore financial practices by directly engaging with service providers and other actors across a number of tax havens, by making a small but kind of functional model, so something that we could use to, in some ways, be offshore. The vehicle consisted of a company in the UK, a company in the Seychelles, and a bank account in Puerto Rico. As this diagram suggests, on paper, or at least in terms of kind of official or easily accessible paper, the two halves of the vehicle existed separately from each other, but we had control over all aspects as kind of visible and official directors of the UK company, and through some other routes that I'll discuss in a second into the Seychelles company. Once we had it set up, we ran a series of focus groups and performances exploring and proposing potential uses of this. So we set it up with some intention of what we would like to do with it, but we wanted to involve others in this process. And during these events, members of the public were offered the opportunity to become formal shareholders of the Offshore Investigation Vehicle. This was not in order to derive profit, but rather to demystify its inner workings through discussion of its structure and its communal use. More than 50 people joined in, and we're joined by some of those shareholders today, actually, on the panel as well. And together we operated the investigation vehicle over about a year. With our shareholders, we initiated a tax avoidance scheme through the online sale of beachwear. So these items display the workings of the scheme through which they were sold, and they're currently on display. They kind of show some diagrams, but they also were passed through the financial processes that were necessary as part of that. We also published The Offshore Economist, a digital publication mixing essays, poetry, and offshore financial advice, to which some of our shareholders contributed. The public-facing aspects of this project was important to us, So the aim to kind of demystify or reveal or just play with as well some of the aspects of the otherwise inaccessible world of offshore corporate finance was really important. And so when it wasn't possible for people to attend focus groups or performances, for example, we produced a hardcover book which gives an overview of the structure's setup and use. Here it is in the Nook Axioma, and it's accessible online, and hopefully a link can be shared in the chat to that for anyone who wants to take a look at it. Part of the aim of the project was to challenge the imaginary of offshore finance as offered in the kind of news and media outlets, often following leaked documents, kind of in the way that Anushka was talking about earlier, that may take a kind of sensationalistic tone, focusing perhaps on individual celebrity actors and their kind of malpractice, which sort of does suggest, as she said, that it's something that's maybe undertaken by a few bad actors that can then therefore be removed or reformed or changed meaningfully. And also we wanted to challenge the kind of narrow tax justice discussion, advocating merely the need to rebalance a state's tax sheet. Tax avoidance, financial kind of modification practices, or the ability to pass this stuff through in hidden ways really have much more of an effect than just balancing a budget. Today we want to focus on two ephemeral aspects of the setup process of this project. We've chosen these in the hope that they give a certain form or kind of allow us to outline a certain character for the space of offshore finance, away from the typical abstract or otherwise kind of top-down simplified depiction. So we'll start here, and this is Offshore Corp Talk. It's a fairly well-known English-speaking forum where individuals tinker with the DIY setup of corporate vehicles across tax havens. As we had a small budget for this project, we were only able to access this type of consultancy rather than that of large banks or law firms. Many of the packages and providers discussed on this forum are distinctly low tier, so they're advertised through Caribbean stock imagery and incentivized through $999.99 pricing. This seemed at the time, and certainly seems now, remains so, minuscule compared to the size of the offshore economy, which the Tax Justice Network calculated to be around $30 trillion in the 2010s. We found a provider called One Offshore Company that was definitely in our price range. They offered a cheap combination of offshore company and bank account, and we searched this forum, among other places, for reviews. In the pile of negative reviews, one positive stood out from a user called Graham. On the basis of this, we thought we'd give One Offshore Company a try. And when the phones picked up, we're greeted by the owner of One Offshore Company, Graham. He makes the suspiciously positive review even more suspicious. But we're not in a position to kind of haggle or be particularly picky over this. So we discuss our needs and we order with him. The first part of the structure that Graham provided us with was the Seychelles company. This company had a nominee director based in Cyprus by the name of Mark Andrew Derek Farmer, or kind of beautifully acronymed Mad Farmer. We never met him, but he signed all of the setup paperwork in his name, as is his kind of role as a nominee director, including a power of attorney giving us control as beneficial owners of the company he pretended to direct. He also signed, again, as is standard practice, an undated resignation letter through which we could remove him from the position at any point. When we received these documents, we noticed that they had spelling mistakes, errors in them, and particularly on some, the connection with our UK-based company, which was at that time registered in our London studio, was included, but with an incorrect address. According to the documents, it was registered at a farm somewhere else in the UK. Kind of appropriate, given that we have a director called Mad Farmer. This is it. This is distinctly not our London studio, if only. We queried this mistake with our provider, and they said they sought it. They, in a kind of standard client relationship. They apologized profusely, and a few days later we received the updated certificate, but we find that it has exactly the same address on it. And these mistakes appear to have been done willingly and intentionally in order to further protect our privacy. Needless to say, we didn't further question this mistake. They kind of sent it very cursorily in the end and remained quite quiet about it. But this is a practice that we'd observed independently of our company formation. So it's not something that we first saw with one offshore company, or not something we could ascribe just to Graham's way of working, but was something we'd seen elsewhere. At the time, the founder of Leave EU, a major group campaigning for Brexit, was being questioned by a UK parliamentary committee as part of an investigation into fake news related to Cambridge Analytica. His name is Aaron Banks, and here he is being questioned about the multiple versions of his names used in the legal documents behind Leave EU. As you can see from the subtitles, he states that the misspellings and wrong names are a matter of simple mistakes. So here he's ascribing those mistakes to Companies House, the official filing and registration body in the UK, and suggesting that it's a little sloppy and it makes mistakes, which kind of plays into his narrative about the ineffectiveness of the state. And you can find his name in many leaked documents, but you have to look quite hard, because you might find Aaron Banks with 2 R's, Aaron Banks with 1 R, Aaron Fraser Banks, Fraser Aaron Banks, Andrew Fraser Aaron Banks, and so on and so forth. He was blessed in offshore terms with a multiply reorganizable name. And so having observed this in other documents and in the process of setting up the first part of our structure, we wanted to explore the scope of making these mistakes. The final step of the vehicle setup was to open a bank account in Puerto Rico. And we were asked by Graham to provide information through some online banking forms. The ultimate kind of end to this was to have cards which we could use onshore attached to kind of finance offshore. We assumed that there'd be a number of automated checks, some kind of basic form validation on the information provided, and also that it would pass by someone's eyes at some point. But we assumed that nothing would be super stringent given the amount of money we were spending. We asked ourselves what would avoid triggering an automated warning, but also be dismissed as a simple mistake or ascribed to lazy copy-paste if a human being were to kind of query it in depth. And we found the answer in the similarity of the lowercase l and the uppercase I in the font used by the form. So it was pretty similar to Helvetica. And typing in a mixture of upper and lowercase, we could make it look like our names were entirely uppercase, but at the point where they were printed in the credit card, they would appear differently. So here we can see that Francesco Taculno and Oliver Smulf instead of Oliver Smith and Francesco Tacchini. This is potentially, was our kind of assumption, enough difference to prevent a pattern match if someone were to query a database for our name. But with enough similarity that it could be passed off as a mistake, and enough kind of weirdness that it could be potentially passed off as a glitch or technical corruption. Again, these things aren't sort of guaranteed or definable, but were kind of based on some of the things that we'd seen in many leaked documents. So the project attempted to understand some of the nuances behind the operations occurring when setting up these offshore corporate vehicles and kind of share them as well. And so putting in place our own system, we wanted to also make it necessary for us to file documents publicly, not only in terms of, making things as part of focus groups and workshops or putting together the book, but ascribing things a kind of legal way as well. And so in having a UK company, we made ourselves liable to UK law. Of course, there are many situations where people are more or less adherent to that, but we wanted to play along with it. And with our shareholders and participants as shareholders of the UK company, we made it necessary to file documents about things that they voted for. And so here you see the first resolution that we passed as a company which was to move into the beachwear business and to produce that beachwear that we later designed and sold. And on it, we very briefly detailed the fact that we would be undertaking the use of various loopholes to minimize the payment of our tax. After submitting this document to Companies House in the UK, we received a letter from them saying that they were unable to accept it. But the reason they were unable to accept it had nothing to do with its content. It was merely that the text was not legible enough, because in the original version, a couple of the graphic elements, a couple of the circles, a couple of the kind of blob shapes were over some of the letters. That was it. They merely requested that we make the text more legible, and upon resubmitting it, they accepted it unquestioningly. And so in this, we've kind of looked at the limits of the ability for something like, for example, Companies House to really be stringent about the checks they pass on things, and similarly passing up and through the different entities that we've engaged in this, the legal or business entities we've engaged in setting this up. Look at the ways that you can kind of push the ability for those organizations to check or not check the information that's provided with them. And we'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Demystification Committee. I'm so happy for this presentation. It's really cool to see how companies are doing exactly what we journalists think they are doing when they are running offshore businesses. It's especially, I mean, we don't have time now for questions, but I will save it for later. Maybe I would like to know how much money you spent for the entire thing, or if you have a number, you can just say it now, and then we can move to RYBN.
2,000 euros.
I can't remember. Yeah, that was it.
2,000 euros. Awesome. That's great. That's a great hack. Thank you. So now I will give the virtual microphone, so to speak, to RYBN, who will show you, dear viewers, basically what is out there, where you can go, you know, and maybe attempt to do something similar, you know, to test it out for yourself and maybe even, you know, get some benefits from it. Who knows? So RYBN, it's yours. Thank you.
Okay. So I just need 1 second of preparation.
Oh, no problem.
Yes, no, it's okay. We prepared a few links to be spread to the chat, to the general chat, which will go with the presentation. So I'm just taking a seat, and maybe yes, maybe I'm gonna start with the slide. So I don't know, Yannis and the team. Yes, thanks. Okay. Okay, so I will try to be as much clear as we can. Right now, we're in the process of working on this project at a different level. So we are back in the research moment. So maybe we're a bit, let's say, obsessed with strange ideas. So we'll try to keep it simple and clear. So we are the RYBN.org. We are a group active since a few years, 1999. And we're working on this project called The Great Offshore, which is actually investigation about like the offshore banking networks and the offshore as a phenomenon. It's an art investigation, so it's a bit different from a journalistic investigation in many different ways. We manipulate the same, as you said, Anushka, we manipulate the same object, but with different parameters and different maybe meanings. I'm going to try to explain a little bit. We follow a methodology we call the extradisciplinary, which is inspired by the writings of Brian Holmes, and which is about like intrusion. So I think the demystification committee, they show it also greatly a kind of extra-disciplinary approach. And this project, the Great Offshore, we decided to start as a field investigation. So we decided to make a list of notable tax havens to visit. So just to make the list clear, the City of London was our first pick. Jersey and Guernsey and the Channel Islands. Dublin. Switzerland, we went to Zurich and also to Basel for the art fair. Liechtenstein in Vaduz, also a very notable one. The Bahamas, the Cayman Islands in Georgetown, the Delaware in Wilmington in the US. Malta, we went in September. Luxembourg, I think we went there a few times. And the Netherlands, which is maybe the last travel we did. And we plan to go also pretty soon in Singapore and Hong Kong to finish, and yeah, maybe Jakarta. So to finish the panorama. The methodology we use is also, it's not only extradisciplinary, but also psychogeography. So this is also inspired by the writings of Guy Debord, the methodology of the situationist in the 70s. And to conduct our investigation, we use a prototype we have built, which is called the Offshore Tour Operator, which is actually like a portable GPS, which is like fueled by the Offshore Leaks data, so the ICIG database. So one of our primary idea was just to visit this location. So it was to confront towards the database of the ICIG to understand what it looks like. So this was like a primary assumption. So the prototype is open source. You can build it yourself, or you can download it on your phone, and you can make a tour in your neighborhood, or if you go to visit your grandma in your grandma neighborhood, to see what's a little bit, try to touch about concreteness of the topic. And it's also a project of speculative algorithmic design, which is our main activity since years. We have a full class of the project, which is called the Algo Offshore, which is actually like a potential systems we are trying to enact, which mix automated systems and offshoring. Okay. And very recently, yes, there is also this Offshore Encyclopedia, which is actually a website where we index all the singular manifestations of the offshore banking, all the folklore, the narratives, the figures, companies, icons, etc., etc. Yeah, so it's part of the research. And yes, and right now. Yeah, we are working on a publication which is called also The Great Offshore, which will be an anthology of text. It will be published, I hope, this year with the UV editions in France. So it will be in French, and it will include different texts on different topics. From James Bridle, Brian Holmes, Vera Tolman and Boaz Levin, Reyer, Peter Hendricks, Rodrigo Fernandez, Brett Scott, Max Ivan, Rachel O'Dwyer, Aude Launay, Ewen Chardonnay, and so on and so on. So there was like something like 14 or 15 different contributors. And the book explores the last part of our investigation, which were covering like the Golden Passport Program, or what we call the CBI, the Citizenship by Investment programs, like Malta is one of the famous locations, but also the seasteading, where we find there is like an interesting connection between these two phenomena. The free ports and all the transformation of the art market, which is one of our main interests as being personally involved in this sphere. So it's also a sphere where we can have informations more easily than some others. Also what we call the virtual financial assets, which is like related to the Money Lab directly, because it's actually the renaming, the rebranding of the cryptocurrencies within the institutional sphere. So that's how Ernst & Young and KPMG, they call the cryptocurrency without the let's say dirty aura of the cryptos. And last but not least, the Luxembourg Space Resources Program and the space mining, asteroid mining, and all these different space extractivism initiatives that are popping all around the world. So this is, let's say, the last part of the investigation. Okay. So these are the, let's say, the perspective right now. Maybe to go like about the what the findings. So I'm gonna try to share some of the findings of this project. As you have seen, it's covering like a large panorama of activities, from field investigation to research and designing systems. And it's here maybe like we can start also the discussion or rely to the seeds you put, Anushka, in the discussion. The first assumption would be like offshore is a secret. And I want to engage three different assumptions. So offshore being assimilated to secrecy, offshore being assimilated to something like elsewhere, at large, and offshore being complex. So we have three topics in mind that I would like to deconstruct quite quickly. So the secrecy of offshore, actually, since the 2008 crisis, we had a lot of documentation and studies. Among the most notable ones, maybe the offshore book by Alain Deneau in 2009, or the book of Nicholas Jackson, Treasure Island, which is also like a mainstream hit of investigative journalism. It's a very good book. Or Gabriel Zuckman from the Economic Sphere with The Hidden Wealth of Nations, I think in 2013. So three of the main, let's say, books of literature, but there is many articles or reviews provided by researchers, journalists, etc., etc. So there is quite a big literature on the topic. The second is like there was a lot of different affairs, of different scandals and trials. So maybe just to name a few, the US versus UBS in 2009, or the same trial, the US versus Credit Suisse. But we could also go to the Wildenstein trials, which last since 2005. Or the Cahuzac scandal in France in 2012, or more recently the Europe versus Apple with the Irish settlement in 2016, or last year there was like the case France versus UBS, which was settled. All those affairs are all around since years, but like there was a media attention. This media attention was brought for sure by all the leaks and the whistleblowers. Among the most notable whistleblower, we have Bradley Birkenfeld, was like the UBS whistleblower from the US. He started all this procedure. But there was also Rudolf Elmer from Julius Baer, which was a WikiLeaks investigation about the bank Julius Baer. Was also Stéphanie Gibault, French whistleblower from UBS, or Hervé Falciani from HSBC, Antoine Deltour and Raphaël Allais, I did not put his name, from Private Water & Coopers, Luxembourg, 2012, or the famous John Doe from Mossack Fonseca, which triggers the Panama Papers. And all these different leaks, they conducted to like media attention with the offshore leaks in 2013, the Luxembourg leaks, 2014, the Swiss leaks, 2015, the Panama Papers, 2016. We had also the Malta file in 2017, which was not by the ICIG. The Paradise paper in 2017. And there was also all the investigation by Daphne Caruana Galizia, which was assassinated like in 2017, and which conducted to the opening of the Daphne project in 2018. And from all this literature, from all these documents, from all these leaks, this media, these books, this analysis, this, we learn a few facts. What we learn is like, I forgot to mention Phineas Fisher and the Sherwood hack last year. Yes, and yeah, sorry. Also, I was going too fast. Also, maybe I want to mention a few art projects. Among them, Taxodus by Femke Haven in 2013, Loophole for All by Paulo Scirio, Citizen X by James Bradle, and The Liquid Citizenship by Femke Haven. Because I think also all those projects, they also like did a lot to let's say, focus the attention. And Duty-Free Art, one of my favorite projects by Ito Steyer. So what we learn from all this is like, first we have a clear view on who are the architect of the offshore banking, and the architect are like the already mentioned UBS Bank from Switzerland, Credit Suisse, Société Générale, BNP, Deutsche Bank, KPMG, like all the big four, what we call the big four, so KPMG, Private Water and Coopers, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. So this is really the architect of it. It's not some like a very small Cayman bank lost in the Caymans, or no, it's like the. We learn also who are the beneficiaries. It's among them like we have Amazon, Apple, Fiat, Google, McDonald's, Microsoft, Netflix, Starbucks, Walt Disney, etc., etc. And Donald Trump. Don't want to not mention him. So what we see here is like it's not a question of a marginal system, a secret system which would be attached by bad chips, black chips. No, it's actually like it's a global system. It's a global capitalism is structured around this the main banks, the main multinationals, the main transnational companies, and some public companies and public figures. So this is maybe the first thing. Like it's about this secrecy. I think no, this is widely, and thanks to the ICIG, but also to the artists I mentioned and all the whistleblower and so on. The second thing is maybe a bit easier. It's offshore being elsewhere, because it's the roots of the etymology of it. The first thing, there is this gap in between the phenomena and the representation, the main representation about it, which is like fueled by a colonial imaginary. We all have in mind like the islands and the palm trees and the beaches and all those kind of cliché in mind. But we have to remind, like, if we keep in mind, like, the capitalism is developing around this structure, then like all these images are only like a proxy. It's part of this gap of representation, and I think this is where we have some work as artists, try to make this gap, like to try to change the way we represent this thing. And the last is like offshore being complex. There is a quote from Gabriel Zucman I like a lot. He says, like, if we believe most of the commentators, the financial arrangements among tax havens rival one another in their complexity. In the face of such virtuosity, citizens are helpless, nation states are powerless, even the experts are overpowered. So the general conclusion is that any approach to change is impossible. In reality, the arrangements made by bankers and accountants shown in the page that follows, so this is an excerpt of the book, The Hidden Wealth of Nations. So the arrangements made by bankers and accountants are often quite simple. Some have been functioning unchanged for close to a century. And yes, actually, it's more like a matter of different layers. You put layers of obfuscation, but like the model usually is pretty simple. So it's what we call the tax avoidance schemes, which is part of this proxy politics. So shell corporation, but also trust. And Alain Supio described it also like as a embodiment of the creative accounting. It's always based on transfer mispricing between like different entities, legal entities, and then we all have heard about the Dutch sandwich or the double Irish, the Singapore sling, Bermuda black hole. But this is really the folklore of the. But right now there is also the cryptocurrency tumblers. I wanted to mention it also for the Money Lab. And we can also talk, if we go to the infrastructure studies, about the free ports. Okay, and legislation. So just to go to the conclusion, I don't want to take too much time. I think we can keep it for the discussion. Just a few words on the conclusion. It will be super fast. Yes, as Reyer Peter Hendrikse quoted, offshore, it has become the new normal. Oh, j'ai l'impression que... Okay, I'm just gonna... Yeah, okay. So image froze for a minute. So offshore has become the new normal. Offshore is an embodiment of what we call the governance by numbers. It's a specific economic led governance. And Reyer still develop, it's like the embodiment of what we could call the neo-illiberalism. So the regime that is working from the offshore structure actually now is transforming into something which is not only a liberal or liberalism or neoliberalism, but something which has become like much worse, so illiberalism. So I want to finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you, RYBN. And to our viewers, please leave comments and questions in the chat on the Money Lab website. We are looking forward to your opinions. And to the speakers, thank you also RYBN for your presentation. I think we don't have enough time for the presentations. I think you could have spoken even more about it. And maybe my first question actually would be to RYBN. So your voice is now, you can speak, so you can just continue. You were, listing all these leaks and whistleblowers, paying an homage in a way. But at the same time, how do we, there's still this wall that prevents actual change from happening. So when we talk about secrecy, which you rightly said, this is no longer a secret. It's not, but it seems that the more there is known about it, the more books are written. Another Gabriel Zuckman book, and we'll know everything. But it still seems that this knowledge is sort of limited to groups that want to actually dig into the topic. Whereas again, so I'm sometimes wondering whether all the revelations, leaks, Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, Malta leaks, you name it, are actually working for. I wonder if they're working for the benefit or for the detriment of the issue. So I wanted maybe to hear from you what your viewpoint is basically of the way investigative journalists are tackling the issue that you are tackling, so sort of systemically and methodology, trying to sort of map out, and help people understand that this is an all-encompassing sort of system. So yeah, maybe I would like to hear about that. So basically, what do you think about journalists?
Yeah, maybe I'm gonna just follow on this question. I think like the work that has been done by the ICIG is a very important one. It provided a lot of information, and not only the ICIG, I also mentioned another media, let's say group of media. I think the EEC for the Malta files. I think they really brought a lot of
European
important information.
investigations.
Yes, and it as well as some like independent journalists, like everybody is thinking, I guess, to Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was murdered for this. But I think like the public understanding has progressed. Very honestly, I think like the let's say parameters of the problem are a bit better known now, and I think it's super important for the let's say possibility of settlement of this question one day or another, at least for regulation, regulators, etc., etc. So but it's I guess where there is maybe a problem is always for me this problem of representation. I think like when you want to illustrate, for example, the articles, how do you concretely like illustrate, for example, this kind of problem? And then we go back to this kind of colonial representation. We have like pictures of letterbox in the Bahamas, for example, which actually are the common letterbox for the people, not like. So there is all this problem of representation, and I mean like it's not easy to I mean for the phenomenon, to be every field going at the same speed, at the same rate. So I guess there is still a lot of work to do, especially because it's also like a very moving, very ephemeral field. Everything goes so fast. I mean, like the benefits, like I mean, like now we begin to talk about the Freeport in the let's say classical media, etc. But it's a field that is always transforming at different levels. So yes, I don't know. Like I just want to acknowledge like the fact that the understanding has progressed a lot already, and I think it's already a lot of things.
So I wanted to maybe move with the next one to back to the Mystification Committee, because near Slovenia, not so far, there's a new onshore-offshore coming up. Maybe you would be interested, even. It's the Serbian part of of Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the capital in Banja Luka, which is where in recent about 10 years, a lot of Slovenian businesses have been searching for less taxes, more privacy. And of late, since the main sort of, or one of the so-called advisors, I guess, of the main ruling party in Slovenia currently has moved there apparently, and has been advertising basically in Slovenia on billboards to just come to Bosnia and we'll hook you up. So I was just wondering, you have this black book, the offshore investigation vehicle. And I was wondering if you have any ideas for the viewers from here, how they can use your black book to disrupt the upcoming new onshore, offshore on the border of Europe, practically. Do you want some time?
I don't know that they'd find anything super future-facing in the black book. We talk a lot about the specifics, I guess, of what we did very particularly, which in some ways can be like generalized outwards to other situations. I guess in the way that RYBN are saying that like things may have sped up or things may have moved into different technologies, but at the base there are very similar processes and practices involved. But I guess it can help perhaps to look for the signs. Maybe like
can you help us with the signs? Maybe just list a few.
You won't find them in the geographical area, right? You won't see them. Okay. I think that's the thing. Like you might see them online. They might come in your targeted ads.
Okay.
If you suggest, sorry, Francesca, you were going to say something.
I wanted to add that also what the project tried to do, I guess, at the time, and the project is now 3 years old almost, was to bring the viewers or the audience that we would encounter through running this project to a level playing field, so that there could be at least a conversation between these audiences and ourselves in regards as to how practically and quite pragmatically a small model of an international corporate structure set up across tax havens would work. And so I think we never really envisioned this project as one that would in some ways trigger a set of or democratize enough the process so that anyone could set up a company and anyone could just spend 2,000 euros that they have on the side to effectively democratize the issue enough so that if everyone does it, then it's like as if no one did it. I think we didn't want or project that as a goal, but there was much more, I think, an experiential question for us to begin with, like a moment of wanting to experience firsthand how the structures looked like or how these processes looked like, and a public-facing aspect to the project, which was the need to always be in discussion with someone else about what we were doing and what we had encountered, and then further to have a kind of like communal use of this structure that we had. So everything we did had always been decided with the people that we encountered throughout the project. And although today we've only spoken about the formal setup of the offshore investigation vehicle, the project really started once the setup was finished, and that was a month into the project, and the project lasted for around 10, 11 months. And the project was us doing workshops or performances or events with people discussing and operating this vehicle. So I'm not sure that, as Oliver said, looking at the book, they'll be able to derive much more than just how the basic structure of a small but functional offshore corporate structure is. But
I was just wondering how. I was just wondering how. Basically, I mean, this is actually a question to all of you. Like, how can people get inspired from your work? To try to maybe add their own sort of viewpoint of the matter to the debate. So that, and then of course, like I said in the beginning, how do we bring the people back at the table where decisions are made that actually indirectly affect them most. In that sense, if anyone wants to add maybe RYBN about how people can get inspired from your venture into offshores, maybe.
Yes, maybe to answer to that question, I would like to go back to this idea of the gap between the problem and the people you mentioned at the introduction, because for sure this gap is a construction, of course, made by image or what Kevin were talking. Imaginaries about offshore that is far away, and that it doesn't concern finally me as a person in my daily life, and the need of that is, I think, the need of passive consentement from the population, consent. To look somewhere else. In fact, this doesn't concern me, so okay, I have something else to think. But if you try to work on the to rebuild a link between this like global offshore economy, which is a bit seen as abstract, and the daily life and like my direct environment. It's for me the base to involve the people to think about that, and so this is part of this is one way we do the offshore, the Great Offshore Project, by trying to imagine prototypes and situations that help people to find traces of this activity in front of their own apartment or in the street. But also the crisis, of course, reveals finally the consequences of phenomena that have like impacts in long term. Even it has been the situation is provoked by like short-term conceptions. The impact is can be long-term, not always, but for example, the hospital's situation revealed by the pandemic crisis means is a result, a direct result. So of course, as you said also in the introduction. So sometimes it appears more clearly this direct relation between me and this infrastructure that is a bit hidden, but finally global.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You look like you want to add something, or okay, sorry. Yeah. So I was just wondering, maybe. Actually, sorry, 1 second. Mm-hmm. The demystification committee. I have one more question actually for you that I would really like to know about. Is it's a technical question. So did they ever perform due diligence on you? And if they did, what kind of questions did you get, and how? What how did you fool them, and how did you try to fool them?
We had due diligence for the bank account, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was
to form a
actually
company also.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had it for the company formation as well. So we had it for both parts, and we fooled them in slightly different ways each time, I guess. In some
But
part,
you
I
can't
mean, in
talk.
some ways, we did provide the required information for the company formation, but initially we'd set up a different UK-based company, of which we were both directors. But at the time, we were in different places and not with the necessary documents. And so we said that we wanted to use this company to direct the other one, or kind of link it through a share, at which point they required then the information for both of us, which we couldn't provide. And so we just dissolved that company because it cost 12 quid and was registered in the UK, and registered a different one with not both of us, and then we're immediately able to set everything up and re-put us in later. So that was a kind of like hack around it.
So I guess just to add to this point, the due diligence part of it, we always respected in some ways, although as our kind of consultant suggested, we didn't always have to do everything. So this was a good example. We should have and could have given documents for both of us as directors of the original company we created, but we were kind of suggested to open another one, and then effectively, technically, I was the only beneficial owner, although, well, yes, I was the only beneficial owner, although we operated and never used our names in any of this. But I would be the one with the legal problems eventually.
Yeah, I was the beneficial owner behind the beneficial owner.
Exactly.
That mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah. So in the UK beneficial owner data, it would be which one of you?
myself.
Yeah. And you would be hidden behind him, which is what I was talking about earlier with registers of beneficial ownership. Basically, you two are the proof that I'm not bullshitting, which is
Please, we can help.
yeah, thank you.
There's maybe one
Go ahead.
one small thing to add was that in this process of due diligence, we also had a moment when we had to open the bank account, and there was a little bit of theater there because we were asked to do a Skype interview, and the person that was interviewing us was based in the US and wanted to sort of, I think in the words of our service provider in the UK, this person in the US working for the offshore bank wanted to get a vibe or get a sense of who we were or who I was. And then that conversation was also very honest, although we didn't talk about the project. I just spoke about the need of minimizing tax for design
Your beachwear
services.
line. Yes,
Yeah.
that's great. So maybe just quickly, because we're a little bit running out of time for our debate, the first part was a little too long. So just maybe some initial ideas of how we can all democratize the debate. And then I will slowly give over the word to our guest here in the studio. One more thing, everyone listening in, please share with us your questions, thoughts, comments, opinions, and we will, try to answer at least a few of them. Thank you. So, dear speakers, any ideas on how to bring this debate back to where we can try to have at least a little bit of an influence on what happens with it?
Yes, maybe if I may. I think there was one good strategy which was actually proposed by Alain Donneau, and which is actually like, and I think you did it when you were saying like this kind of offshore, onshore, like is try to name things and to not be fooled by the. So he calls this like the laundering by language. The fact that we normalize usage of offshore strategies into the global economy, like with this kind of tax optimization, we change the name and now it's all. So I think one of the good and very primary, basic and fruitful strategy would be just to find the right word to name things. And I think it's an effort even for us who are working with this topic a lot. I mean, like the more you dig on a topic and the more you are like, but this, and also to break with the complexity, because the fact to say, this is complex, and people, how complex, I don't want to know. I think it's important to say, no, actually it's not so complex. It's quite simple, because actually it's not so complex. But so this would be my two options.
So basically, to name things for what they are, to not downplay them, basically, and sorry, the second, and to, oh no, I got lost now.
Break with complexity, yes.
Thank you, break with the complexity. However, that's why I think I got lost, because it actually is complex, I mean, because people sometimes, even filing their own personal tax reports, it just is a pain, So if you imagine them actually reading about something like a tax scheme, and even if you draw it really nicely and you do all the graphics and you try to tone it down, the narrative, but still keep the facts intact, it's very hard to convey in a way that people can identify. That's why I keep nagging you about this. So you and I don't think we can see eye to eye on complexity. On everything else, I think we can. Maybe I see you below. So the Mystification Committee, anything to add about how we can start bringing the debate back into the hands of people?
I wonder if I don't have a lot to add to those two things, but I guess like you said earlier, it's unlikely that it goes away, right? However, there are also moments where it is being expanded or enhanced or increased. So this onshore offshore space you just described. So it's like, is there a benefit to directing attention more towards the places where it comes up anew rather than trying to tackle the old and entrenched ones? And in doing that, in stopping enough of them, can you then like work your way into the more entrenched aspects of it? I mean, I'm thinking about this a lot, just being sat in London, not very far from, of course, the City of London, which OIBN mentioned, but also with the proposals pinning around for example, free ports on the east coast of the UK. It's like, there are current and very important things that need to be tackled that maybe can be done on a local level, that I would have to go through too many layers of representation to tackle, for example, the UK's involvement with the tax havens that have sprung out of its empire, for example. So like, I can maybe protest the free port, and probably not a lot will come out of that, but maybe something, but I definitely cannot do a lot about the kind of empire links.
The Channel Island.
Right, exactly. Yeah, even that I can't.
You can't really, I know. Yeah,
outside,
so. Yeah. Well, I mean, in a way, I guess I'm happy to know that we all have the same issue, the same problems. Only we have the output is different, and the way we tackle it, I guess. But I think this is a good time now to move the debate to our distinguished guest on the stage that I cannot see. So I will give it over to Matej Cviter.
Yes, hello. My name is Matej Cviter. I'm a journalist at ostro.si and at Radio Student. Thank you for your presentations. It was like your projects are very interesting in the sense like they try to demystify or break the complexity of like the technical stuff of the offshore world. And I think they do that brilliantly. What I would like to know from you is what you think about maybe approaching the problem, maybe from completely the completely opposite side. So what I'm thinking here is the proposition of Nicholas Shaxson, who our YBN already mentioned. Like, his idea is that the whole idea of offshore and of trying to lowering taxes, simplifying the regulation, comes from this idea that of national competitiveness, that nation states compete against each other for investments, and that nations just have to be competitive and lower the taxes, which is intellectually flawed and doesn't hold water. I mean, investments are not like businesses don't base their investment decisions on the tax rate, and if they do, these investments are probably not worth much anyway. And actually, it's harmful in the end. It's not like for the offshore country, it doesn't really have a positive effect, but probably a negative one. It increases inequality and so on. So like, his proposition is like, we have to start from here, from actually trying to break this idea of nations competing against each other. So yeah, what do you think about that, and how would you as artists maybe approach that?
Who wants to start? Sorry, I got a little bit disclaimer. Matej is from my center, so I didn't expect that he's going to be the first one to answer the question. So I'm a bit like, So who wants to start trying to answer to Matej's question?
I don't know if I can.
Demystification? Okay.
I don't know if I can answer, but I can be pessimistic. In that we've just seen an opportunity for a lot of international cooperation. We've seen a lot of countries put in the same situation with a kind of global pandemic, and we've seen the kind of ugly side of international competitiveness kind of rear its head in that, and thinking about looking for PPE or other things. And it's like, and so, yeah, I mean, I would love to know of a way to kind of talk of international competitiveness from a top-down layer, but I think it's very difficult. I think that kind of thing, again, can come from individuals and populations coming together outside of the structures of their states, perhaps, but I don't know how you would do it on a state level. And I think that's kind of, if I remember rightly, that's kind of what Shaxson is suggesting is needed, is kind of states to accept that they're not in that kind of form of competition.
Also, maybe to add, it seems that the scale of this, alternative economy, or maybe we shouldn't use alternative, picking on RYBN's point of using the right terminology, of this essential part of global capitalism that is this kind of movements that we see elsewhere, is maybe too, it's too big to fail in a way where, even picking up on the pandemic point you just made, I come from Italy, and Italy's overall budget for dealing with the pandemic is 750 billion euros. And that's half of the GDP, and tax evasion amounts to a quarter of the GDP. So 50% of that's yearly. So 50% of what is being spent for this incredible situation is lost yearly through movements which are pretty much existing under the bracket of tax evasion, and therefore facilitated in one way or another through this kind of tax havens. So I also, of course, don't have an answer, but a comment.
Let's try RYBN. Do you have an answer, maybe?
No. There is no answer to this kind of question, but I like the proposition to reverse the perspective. I think it's super important. I think it's also why we put the proposition of Reyer about neo-illiberalism in the balance, because it's not about for sure a dichotomy between the private sector and the public sector. It's not the state versus the companies, because the problem of deregulation, it's actually enacted by regulation. There is no deregulation which is floating on the air. It's deregulation is constructed, and it's constructed actually by the politics of a state. So you have this actually this fake dichotomy between the private and the public has to be deconstructed as well. And it's also what we saw right now. We saw, or we are witnessing, actually, all the people let's name them, like Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, Jair Bolsonaro, or people like Jeff Bezos. They're working, in their different spheres, but more or less hand in hand. Their system is cumulative toward this situation of neo-illiberalism. And it's not also let's say it's not a coincidence. Is right now there is social movements everywhere in the world. I mean, there is social movement in France, in Lebanon, in the US. I mean, there is this resistance against the rise of this kind of strange regimes which are grotesque and authoritarian in the same moment. And maybe not grotesque, but it's actually it's not there is a part of clownery inside, but okay. So I would say yes, we have to it's a moment we have to rebuild this image and to try to understand exactly what we are seeking, because the answer is not about a new regulation or another regulation which will actually deconstruct the older regulation, etc., etc. The problem is systemic, is endemic, and it's deeply in the roots of capitalism. So clearly, it's where we have to act somewhere before this dream of capitalism become this kind of Donald Trumpish situation everywhere.
But aren't we there already? So has the train left the station yet?
I would say like as long like people are like, I mean, there is people in the streets everywhere. So and we are
But not about
witnessing
tax
this. So
havens.
it's in France since 1 year. It's about tax haven. Like there was a lot of what we call the gilets jaunes where they are talking about this. It's not totally uncorrelated. And if people are in the street, I mean, like it's easy to make the connection. So I would say no. I wouldn't say people there. And I think in Lebanon could be the same, and etc. So the reasons to be outside, but there is this kind of internalization of the struggles, of the different struggles. So I don't know. We can see it very pessimistically, and I mean, like, we are not the major optimistic people on Earth, but we can also like try to reverse the perspective and see also where there is some kind of optimism to see.
Okay. Thank you. Matej, are you happy?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I'll just leave the floor to the next question.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Marusha Babnik. I'm a tax activist and tax responsibility, corporate tax responsibility advocate here in Slovenia. Currently, I'm working on looking for partners in the CE region to work more closely with them on tax issues and debt and development finance. So a lot of things, first of all, thank you very much for a very interesting panel. And I love the exhibition as well in Axioma project office. There was already mentioned by Anushka the dangers of promotion of what we do. So when we try to raise awareness of how things work, we actually also unintentionally promote these. So in last 6 years, I think, especially also in light of Luxembourg leaks, we found ourselves in the increase of deals between state of Luxembourg and other states in EU and companies after we all warned about the dangers of, or at least hidden effects of these kind of deals between the countries and the companies. And here again, we were mentioning some structures that are now being common knowledge and more or less being promoted to people that are then misusing this. So I'm just wondering about how you deal with this duality of our work, trying to raise awareness and trying to stop this kind of behavior, at the same time promoting it. And also, just from the point of view of measures that the countries can take, you already mentioned things that failed, measures that failed. So we have the register of beneficial owners that is not really working, and also the due diligence that some of you faced and didn't stop you in in your tracks. So I'm just wondering which kind of measures do you think should be needed, or where the lack of these measures is. So what can we do to make it better and to hopefully stop the next one that is trying to do this, and convince them that it's actually better to contribute to the society that they are actually working in and living in. Thank you.
Thank you, Marusha. Shall we put it to the demystification committee this time, or the other way around? Oh no, sorry, RYBN this time, or who goes first? I would love to have you in this room. It's terrible. So who wants to go? RYBN, hit it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, very short. For me, there is no paradox to talk about a problem. Putting light on the offshore industry. I'm not sure it's. I don't catch how it can feed this industry. And about what can we do? I think yes. For sure. Also, it's a question of scale, but as we said just before, if we, comment dire, about about the people in the streets, la manifestation, comment dire? Yeah, the social movement,
protesting?
the protest, yes. Everything is related. I mean, the offshore industry is the basement of the way the economy works. So we have to rethink everything. I think it's not like a separate problem. So yeah, I would say like we have just to think all the intersection of all the problem together.
I think what Marusha was pointing at, and Marusha, correct me or add on to your question if you'd like, is just that because we are reporting on tax havens, we're contributing to basically the normalization because people are reading about it and they are considering it as film, whatever, something that happens not in my living room. I thought that's. But Marusha, please correct me.
Yes, partly that, and partly the ones that are interested in going in that direction of minimizing or optimizing their tax bill actually now know how to do it.
Get ideas.
We actually had an event really early in our campaign, and we used the title, if you want to know more about tax avoidance and you were afraid to ask, please come and talk to us. And actually we got a lot of tax advisors to the event. It was meant for NGOs and the public. So we luckily had a really good lecturer who turned the program around and started with tax morale. And at the end of the first section before the break, everybody was gone. But just saying, the ones who are interested and maybe do already know the connections to what they are doing or their everyday life might listen to more than the ones that we actually need to listen and go to the streets later on.
Something I wanted to say in relation to your point of do we just end up promoting the field or the issue? I would still defend that there needs to be like a level of, I guess, literacy needed regardless in order to be able to face the issue. And so I think that some of what this project we were working on was trying to do was to provide the kind of basis for some of that literacy. And then I had another kind of point, which was about the measures. I think you asked what measures there could be. And something that we didn't explore at the time was perhaps the relationship between databases and neural networks, and the way that a lot of the mistakes that we had encountered were mistakes that would appear as mistakes in a kind of like traditional database where two entries don't match because my name has a letter which differs from another letter. But these databases could be could become more powerful, and I don't know exactly how this field looks like, but I wonder if there is the opportunity of maybe Oliver, you can say something about this, or you know more, but the opportunity for discussing the relationship between neural networks and machine learnings and databases, and how then matching could look like.
Yeah, I guess there's an interesting thing in some form of automated like study of those things, I guess, and that actually is one of the potential benefits of a large scale leak, is that in order, if I'm right, if I remember right, in order for the Panama Papers to be even kind of used and published, there was an immense amount of like technological investigation into that, into searching and sorting the documents, right? And so even in doing that, you learn a lot more about the tendencies and the patterns that would occur that could then be the basis for building something else. And so I guess it's like balancing the fact that people know more, but also the fact that people know more, right? Like people know more so they can do it, but also people know more so that they can investigate it or build tools through which to investigate it. And I think that that sense of kind of, building potentially automated or technological tools to aid that would be something that could be quite helpful.
Maybe I can add here, I mean, it's not precisely what you're talking about, but the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, has this thing called aleph.occrp.org. So it's called Aleph. It's like a documents depository, basically, for any and all scraped registers anywhere in the world, public records, you name it. So I suggest you take a look. I am, disclaimer, regional editor of OCCRP, so I'm a little bit pushing my own tribe here, but it is a very, very, very cool database. So I suggest you take a look. Marusha, thank you. We have 2 more guests to join us with questions. Who's going to go? Okay. Hi.
Hello, my name is Giga. I'm basically a lawyer and anti-money laundering specialist. I work in a cryptocurrency industry for the last couple of years. And basically, I would like to hear maybe your thoughts about the technological side of the offshore or tax evasion. Basically, we see, as the Demystification Committee pointed out, they paid a few €1,000 for the whole offshore setup. So I think this is a really low price, and we can expect that these prices may even fall in the future, that these structures will get more widespread. And I would love to basically hear your opinion on how can the nation states basically tackle all the individuals that have the internet, the cryptocurrencies, all the tools available that are slowly progressing and becoming cheaper and cheaper.
Who do I give this one to first? Any hands? No? Okay. Then I'm go. Oh, yay! RYBN raising a hand. So I'm going there first.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
in terms of media archaeology, in terms of technical, historical, there is a few interesting facts, a few interesting bridges between offshore, which is actually like a very scriptural, very it's really like a written activity, and the slow implementation of automated system. If you want to dig a little bit, there is all this famous and incredible patent of you can see it in most of the patent register of automated system, which were like validated by the state of different countries about like fully automated system for tax avoidance, which is quite. I think there is a kind of irony in these systems because they are validated by institutions, but they undermine the institutions afterward. So there is this, and it was like, for example, there was a famous one which were like patented by KPMG. Etc. And today there is a new. They also patent the complex, the so-called complex Dutch sandwich, etc., etc. So there is this race about like it's also to protect their own. So if, for example, you're working in Credit Suisse, you cannot use UBS complex system, etc. It's patented. You can have a trial. no, it's super funny, like too. And the blockchain actually is a very interesting. That's why we mentioned the VFA, the virtual financial assets, which is actually the name KPMG, Ernst & Young. They sell blockchain in Malta due to the Deregulation Act that was enacted in 2017 there. So we were there just for the day of the enactment of the law. We made a lot of different meetings, and it's funny to see they sell it as a solution for transparency. They sell blockchain as the future solution of transparency. So there is actually, I think, a deep investigation to to conduct, I mean, like a thesis or a doctorate or a PhD on this topic, because it's not the most well-known technique. The complexity is always put in the debate, but the technique is a bit always like put on the side. But the technique is also like a part of the folklore of the tax haven. If you go to Delaware, for example, there is a museum of technology for business, which is a very small museum where you have all the typing machines, the clocks for the stock exchange, the first computers, and they all have like a Curta machine. Curta is a small analog computing machine from the Second World War. It was like it was a computing machine calculator of the German soldier during the war, but it was patented in Liechtenstein. So there is a very interesting story, and I think the way it's super interesting now, like to conduct like a research about like let's say a blockchain, because they really use it against like the let's say the different hopes that the blockchain can carry about like transforming the systems with the intermediaries, etc., which is like the main topic of Monelab. It's how the blockchain and the cryptocurrency could enact a social transformation. I think it's really like the basic of these meetings, and I think there they really use it for the opposite topic. So I think it's interesting maybe to do also cross comparing in between like these two different versions of the same object.
I think
I see the Mystification Committee wants to add. Okay, go ahead.
I was just I think there's something, there's different layers in the system that we're talking about that have different levels of technical engagement or involvement. So at the scale of, for example, the Big Four, there is, as Aurélien just kind of outlined, a massive amount of potential technological investment and like interest. At the base level, so at the kind of single jurisdiction that our company was registered in, for example, or at the kind of on-the-ground service provider level, it's very low tech. Right, so we were mailed a load of documents, of course, because they have to be physical, because that's the legal part of it. Other things were kept in filing cabinets in the office directly. Stuff as much as possible in that case is not put through digital systems unless it's explicitly required to be put through digital systems. So we communicated via email. The bank, because there are certain higher levels of know your customer rules, potentially did stuff through online forms. But a lot of it is still kind of hand-signed documents that we have copies of or that we frame copies of and put elsewhere. So I think there's interesting things at different scales as to what is very technological in this, and maybe it's the like meta view of it is, you know, databases and technology, but the kind of smaller view and at least in the budget world that we were operating in was very kind of manual. And I don't
maybe to add to this.
No, go.
To add to this, I remember when we began looking at the registers of tax havens, we realized quickly that there was, firstly, aesthetically, totally this kind of like Web 2.0 aesthetic that was being used. But also the systems themselves felt very weak. And I think in Paolo Cirio's project that has been mentioned earlier on, the beginning of that project actually started with him being able to get behind some of the registry of the companies in the Cayman Island and being able to scrape really quickly a lot of the information from there. And I remember when we looked at our own online interface for the bank account we had, for the corporate bank account we had, we could see that passports document had been uploaded, and we could see the name and the metadata about the passport documents for the nominee director we didn't know. So it felt fairly weak.
Wow. But that was how many years ago? Sorry.
That would have
That
been
was before
2018.
Panama Papers or after? So
was
before
after.
Panama Papers. Oh, after. Oh, I'm surprised. I
Just-
would think that they would, just strengthen the security. Like the
You hope.
one of the main Slovenian providers in the Panama Papers was threatening us before publication, saying that we we basically hacked his inbox and stole the emails. So I thought, wow, then you really must have bad security if that's what you think. But anyway, Giga, are you content? Do you want to add
Thank you.
something? No? Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
And then I'm inviting the fourth guest to come and speak to us all.
Hi, my name is Sebastian. I work for Transparency International Slovenia. I previously have worked on beneficial ownership transparency issues. And I think what has been mentioned today is quite true. Tax or secrecy havens are let's say, marathon runners that have been running for 100 and something years. Trusts, for example, exist or date back even to the Crusades. So I'm still optimistic about us chipping away from the pillars of this system, either through art projects, advocacy work that we do, investigations that Anushka does, and so on. And I think that we are still still gaining on the system, gaining on the runners. So I'd be interested on your thoughts about what do you think will be the tipping point, or when do you think we will reach it, so we will be able to say that we have ended secrecy havens, or if not, maybe just what will be the next chip that will be chipped away.
Thank you, Sebastian. This is really the question I've been looking for this whole 2 hours. So I would actually like every single one of you to answer it, please. And also because let's try to wrap this up on the optimistic line. I mean, we're not wrapping up still. There's people coming from the chat, but just talking about us. Could you please shortly answer Sebastian's question, please? Who's raising a hand? Okay, I'm going the mystification committee because you're looking up and looking for your thoughts.
I'm looking for optimism. I haven't found it. I think it's somewhere up there.
Okay, then let's try your neighbor, your Italian. Oh no, okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that the looking for like large scale wins may be quite saddening and maddening, but looking for small wins of awareness and public ideas around this is the kind of important thing. So the very fact that you have discussed so much, Anushka, for example, the way that this can and may need to be communicated to the public, and the way that the kind of other discussions gone in terms of thinking about how to frame this and how to have the conversations, I think is very important. And I think this idea of like turning a tide of opinion is the first thing to look for. And I think it has happened. I think there's maybe an opportunity in the moment where we see large multinational corporations come back to states for aid, which we've seen, for example, with airline companies at the moment, who are otherwise like massive users of offshore structures, then coming back to the countries which they are ostensibly based in and saying, maybe we need a little bit of money to stay going. And that is an opportunity to then, you would hope, from a state point of view, say, well, if we give you some money, then you might need to care. But I don't think there's necessarily the political will for that. But
well, let's go to France for that, because they just had this, Renault asked for help, and we all know how offshores and Renault are going. So, didn't Renault Mitsubishi ask for help, no? In France. Am I mistaken?
What? Sorry?
No?
Sorry?
Didn't
What was
Renault The car
Pardon?
maker?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
ask for a bailout for the COVID.
Uh, well, it's okay.
Sorry, and I'm sorry, I totally
No, 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 no,
unprepared.
no.
Sorry.
It's a bit complicated because like most of the I mean like most of the industries they ask because they know they can gain for it. So whether they ask legitimate, legitimate, if it's legitimate or not, they still ask. It's the same. They ask credits for research, even if they don't do research. And the state is always giving them money without like it's like there is no research about how they use it, no restrictions to use it, like the crédit d'impôt recherche.
I'm sorry,
so
can I jump in? I'm sorry, can I jump in?
please.
I was just thinking because France, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that France installed some sort of limitations for companies to receive COVID-19 help if they are involved in offshores or if they're registered in offshores, but then Renault asked for the money, and has some sort of offshore connection through its partner Mitsubishi and also. So anyway,
Yes, but
sorry. Yes.
no. But you know, there is France is like right now is I think it's like the US, and there is two things with what is said in the TV or in the newspaper and what is enacted by a law, and it's always very different. So a few days ago, the stock exchange was it was like a chaos, a crisis, and the hospital was a crisis, and then the state was ready to put money on the table, etc., etc. And no company with a subsidiary in the offshore legislation, the 5 legislation on the list, would got money. They always find, like small tricks like this, like okay, they can say like offshore company and etc. But the thing is, like right now, the crisis is a bit like, at least in the mind of they already project into the next presidential election. They forget about the crisis, and now it's a time for the accountancy, and so now there is a debt with this crisis. So someone has to pay, and it will be not for sure the big company. Not Renault. And Renault is also a very interesting situation because we know his network of companies, of offshore companies, but still is this kind of hero who can jump out of Japan. Well, anyway, I don't want to go too much into that, but it's also like a fantastic interest. This story for me is like
okay.
It's a marvelous story. No, I mean like it's really like a. It's like Donald Trump, like it's impossible to understand this kind of thing. What is the mechanics behind this? How can the media, for example, give the word to this guy and say that he's a rocambolesque hero flying away, blah blah blah. So that's again we need to go back to the right way to put words on situation. And maybe like if the media in France at least would do their job at this level, maybe things would go a bit better. So I think like it's always the same question that was asked by Marusha about knowledge. With the right word, with the right knowledge, and I think things could go a bit more fluently. Yes.
So
I agree. One thing to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So just one thing to add is that
Go ahead.
Going back to this issue of the representation. It feels like often if we engage with the mediatic representation of these issues, we get desensitized through the use of those visual tropes that have been discussed earlier on. And I think that totally, it would be already, I believe it would be already a good place to be if we got to a place where we're able to discuss with more nuanced terminology and to even reuse certain tropes. I think partially what we tried to do with this beachwear project was to use the palm trees and use the coconuts and use all the elements that would be normally ascribed to Taxhaven, but use them in a grotesque manner, use them to hide information or hide diagrams, or use them to point at things. So I would hope that that could be the next chip to be chipped away, change in the language.
Good, but do you think that that countries will take advantage of the crisis, like Sebastian suggested they might, and maybe install some changes in terms of allowing beneficiaries of state money and their offshore involvement, or do you think it's too early, way too early, even though the crisis is as bad as it is, and it's going to probably get worse?
I would hope so. I heard that the European Union last month discussed a new 6-point action plan to deal with money laundering at like a European level, also in light of some of the money laundering that has happened throughout this time of the pandemic. And I've also read that 3 or 4 countries, some of the Baltic countries, were against the plan because of, well, I'm not sure exactly as to why, but there has been some scandals with Swedbank and the Baltic countries. So I don't think it's simple again, but that discussion has come up in the last month.
Anyone else has anything to add to this, or Sebastian, are you happy with the reply, or would you like to add something else?
Yeah, all good.
Cool. Okay.
Thanks.
So then I suggest, because we're getting a little late, it's 10 to 7, so I suggest we move on to hear what our viewers have to say. So I'm giving the floor over to Nika, who was in touch with them.
Okay, so the first question, I guess the answer would be quite fast, I hope. It's for the Mystification Committee, and it comes from Rod 994433, and 2 asterisks. The question is, who paid the £1,600 for opening the company?
It was money that we had as part of a residency co-organized by the Wilhelm Flusser Archive in Berlin and Transmediale. So the public paid for it, as Transmediale's publicly funded project.
Yeah, okay, so I'll go to the second question. It's from OME. What about local currencies that actually organize offshore on site and in plain view of local communities? Have you thought about the G1 Libra currency, for example, that is still out of the tax scheme? And that's the question for, I guess, anyone.
I see our RYBN wants to speak.
Okay, no, there is something which is interesting with the local experiments with currencies, which is actually like the fact you break with the system and you try to enact also very local. So it's not always like just a process of offshoring. Local currencies is mainly like a way to enable circuit court, and to empower a little bit the local economy. So in this regard, it's also a question of struggle in between local situation and global situations. And I think it's super important actually to work with a network of local currencies, alternative currencies that can question a lot of usage of the currencies of money. In Money Lab, there is a lot of history of different currencies that were presented. I'm thinking to the one which is used in Macau, and where the money itself questions the
Macau in Milano.
Yeah, in Milano. So for me, it's not like it would be like just a reduction to call like each currency has its own object and its own values and its own. So it depends. I'm not sure. I know the one which was discussed before, but I think at least to try to break a little bit with the global capitalism can be like it's interesting experiment to conduct.
Okay, and then the last question would be from Oliver Walker. and it's addressed to the Demystification Committee. Could you clarify the criticism you had of where the debate is, for example, the Tax Justice Network? Yeah.
I think that's something I mentioned in the presentation, right? I think the critique is primarily of not necessarily of the aims of the organization, but again, going back to these ideas of language and imagery that have been kind of brought up throughout this, that if you watch, for example, the documentary The Spider's Web, which is really like full of very important and interesting information, the way that it's presented is very, very doom-laden and very kind of particularly framed. You open kind of grayed out imagery of London, shiny buildings and so on and so forth, and it kind of like, yes, it's talking about this, the problem being kind of focused there in a way that connects lots of things together, but it lacks a certain kind of subtlety and nuance that is important to kind of busting some of the myths or some of the like dominant narratives around this. And I think that the way that RYBM then kind of talked about like offshore not necessarily equaling secrecy, not necessarily equaling elsewhere, and I know there's been some debate on this, but not necessarily equaling complexity, is an important part of this, like moving it away from that thing. I think the debate has the kind of stall has been set out that it is problematic in terms of countries' balance sheets and at a certain scale, but there are other ways to talk about it, and I think it being subsumed under that one narrative sort of loses some of the potential to discuss it in those different ways.
Okay. Anyone else has anything to reply maybe to that last question? No? Okay. Then thank you, Nika. Thank you, dear speakers. I'm so sorry we couldn't host you here in Ljubljana, but maybe there will be a next time. Obviously, we are not getting rid of tax havens for a long time. Hopefully my son, who's 4 and was born 2 weeks before we published Panama Papers, once he's my age, maybe it's going to be a little different. But we still have a lot to do until then. So I thank you for your contributions to the wonderful debate. And I thank all our viewers. Have a good evening, and don't go to a tax haven unless you intend to disrupt one. Ciao.
Thank you, Anushka.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you, including the guests in studio and the audience online, for the valuable inputs and contributions to the debate, and invite you all to take part to our upcoming appointment. The next panel, entitled Blockchain Radicalizing the Social Imagination, is scheduled for Monday, June 22nd at 5 p.m. Central European Time, always at axioma.org/MoneyLab8. In an era where blockchains are being used for the purpose of increasing corporate power, of consolidating inequality, or for new forms of surveillance and exploitations, are other blockchain futures possible? With us, there will be the writer and researcher Jaya Clara Brecche, author of the B9 Lab Ethical Training Module for Blockchain Developers and the Satoshi Oath, Max Haven, Canada Research Chair in Culture, Media and Social Justice at Lakehead University in Northwest Ontario, and the Media Theory and Digital Arts researcher, curator, and practitioner Martin Selinger. The panel will be moderated by researcher and project coordinator at the Institute of Network Cultures, Inte Kloerich. The MoneyLab 8 is co-produced by Axioma Institute for Contemporary Art Ljubljana, together with Kino Šiška, in the framework of KON's Platform for Contemporary Investigative Art. Thanks for being with us today. See you next week.
you.